country. So thank you very much, and I'm so glad to be part of this annual business summit. What I plan to do today is talk to you about the importance of school education, which is not really such a fashionable topic, but which is so close to my heart, and I would like to share some of my views on this and how school education is, in fact, the crux to India's democracy, the crux to India's development. And if we are planning to look at India's democracy and development as uh, and its role as a global power, I feel that we have to maintain both democracy and education from its foundational levels. So I think it's so important that we pay our emphasis on the issue of democracy and school education. Before I begin, I think I will have to highlight the fact that the school education has been in a peril, and one is calling it as an education emergency today, especially after the COVID and after the closure of some 1.5 million schools. All of us know how this has affected the lives of children. And the number is huge, the lives of 250 million children. There are many studies which show how some millions of children are in peril today, especially the girl children. They have been pushed out of school, they have been subject to gender violence and abuse, they are victims of child marriage. So I think really there is a need to pay attention to these girls who have been, out of school. And you must know that these girls who are out of school have been actually in school, and they fought very hard to be in school, especially children from the Dalit and Adivasi communities, where they had to fight inch by inch to move from class 1 to class 2, class 2 to class 3. Many of them have reached up to 10th class with great aspirations for education, with new dreams, as you have talked about, with new aspirations, the way you would want to visualize a new India. They had the vision of new India where they would be out of graduating out of school into higher education. The COVID has become a huge disaster, and most of their dreams have just crumbled, and we will have to think of them when we talk about democracy and school education. Let me tell you that many of these girls, even as I talk to you, are on cotton farms. They're on chili farms, are subject to the heat of summer, and with legs, with feet, with blisters. So I think it is so important to remember them when we are talking about this. The other day, I was with some young girls from the city of Hyderabad. They have all become rag pickers. They're all on land sites, picking garbage, separating plastic from other waste. And these were children who were studying in class 7 and class 8. I think we will have to sort of look at what peril COVID has brought to these children. And we have boys as head load carriers. We have boys who are now working in shops, working in establishments. And I think we will have to also think about them and their lives, and what, again, is the huge burden that there is on them, and also the government, to rescue them, to relieve them, and to see that there is a continuity of education. We all know that there has been a loss of education. A child in class 3 is now in class 5 without going to school and has forgotten everything. So one will have to do something about that. At the same time, you find that there is a decline in spending on education. The budgets have become low. So I thought I would give you this background before I move on to what I am going to say. Now, if this is the situation, the only rescue to them from this situation is the essence of India's democracy. The only way we can provide succor to these children is remembering the preamble to India's constitution. That is the hope that they have. If there is any meaning that citizens of India get from the constitution of India, I think that meaning is most relevant to the poorest, to the weakest, to these children. For us, it may be abstract notions. It may be beyond us because we're already enjoying these privileges. But for those who are Dalits, for those who are Adivasis, I think the Constitution of India and its preamble is its only hope. So, in a way, these are not abstract notions for those children. These are real issues, and this is what I think India's democracy is about, and that they will have to, the Constitution gives them the promise India holds for them. So I will not read it, but some of the things that they have been denied because denied because of COVID and even earlier. But I mentioned COVID to tell you about how much of emergency this issue is. See, what is a democracy? A democracy is a system where the weakest and the poorest are respected, where they claim their rights, where justice is available to them. It is so important to discuss justice in this context. When we say justice, we ask the question, is it fair that a girl goes to a garbage dump and works night and day breathing all kinds of chemicals that are in the garbage? Is it just, is it what the Constitution promised? Has it come close to her reality at all? So if she has to come out of that reality to in fact enjoy justice, enjoy the privileges, I think there is a need for the state to do more, to see that she is not sitting on that garbage dump. Then does she have a freedom of expression? Is it equal at all? I mean, democracy means equality. Democracy means justice. Democracy means rights. Democracy means ensuring that all of us are equal and there is a dignity of the individual. So all these are compromised for the child who is out of school. And for them, it is for them that the Constitution is important. And I think it is in that context we find that if there is a compromise of any of these values, then it will affect all of us. It's just not that they are being affected. I think you and me, all of us are affected. If out of the 250 million children, 50% of them are out of school today. I mean, nobody has done an estimate of it, but there are small NGOs here and there who have made sample studies. And it is very clear, even UNICEF has come up with a study which says that 50% of them are out of school, which is a very, very big number. And it's not just something that is unjust and unfair for the children. It has got something to do with the texture of India's democracy, So that is it. So there are challenges to India's democracy. As students of business management, you would of course talk about the challenges to India's democracy in terms of, say, for example, a weak manufacturing sector, where there is a bypassing of industrial revolution, where urbanization has taken place without industrial revolution, and the consequences of it for India's democracy. Where you can talk about market and its relation to India's democracy. There are, as business management students, your perspectives on India's democracy are certainly linked to problems and challenges of market. And sometimes it might feel that perhaps there is no need for democracy. Let's go ahead with the market economy. That actually perhaps democracy is coming in the way of development. I think this is something that you will have to search and think about. I don't want to do much about that debate. I think it can never be development versus democracy. Democracy itself is development. There are no binaries, but I will not get into it. I think as business management students, you will certainly like to look at the debate that sometimes, which I feel is very dangerous, debate of democracy versus development. And I would very clearly and categorically state that that debate is a wrong debate. It has to be democracy as development. So, if that is so, the challenges to democracy is poverty. As we said, that if the definition of democracy is got to do with inclusion, it's got to do with social justice. If that is a definition, then poverty itself is unjust. Nobody should be poor. There is injustice in poverty itself, and the second aspect of it is that the a democracy means participation. Democracy means liberty, which is another principle that we've talked about. And we see that there is a trend over a period of time where there is an increasing centralization, where the states have been denied their vision of what the state should be like. You know, if you find the education policy is defined at the central level, health policy is defined at central level, tribal policy is defined at central level. Most of the policy, even poverty alleviation policy, is defined at the central level. Funding for that comes from the center, from the union government, and accountability is to the union government. So gradually you find that this state powers are being eroded. I think that is a challenge to India's democracy. In fact, it is being eroded in the sense that if you look at the 15th Finance Commission, the union government is going to transfer funds directly to Gram Panchayats, which is very good. That there is a deepening of democracy at the level of Gram Panchayats, but it is bypassing the state government. Is it good to bypass state government and for the central government to go directly to the Gram Panchayat? It's a debatable point, but I think it is a challenge to India's democracy. The other challenge to India's democracy, which you know, which I know, is that of electoral politics. The way it seems, it looks like it is neither representative nor participatory. I will not go into the details of it, but I would like to conceptualize the electoral politics, which has lost its essence of democracy. It is not genuinely representing people. The policies are done without consultation of the people, and it has become totally away from the poor, away from citizens also. And neither is there participation anywhere. After the voting right, after the ballot paper in the box, there is no participation at all. And I think this has to be restored. And of course, I gave this to you earlier about there's more emphasis in the discourse on development, but certainly we are not neglect of public education and healthcare. I think that's very, very important to highlight the fact that there is so much of privatization in both public education and healthcare, making it unaffordable and unaccessible for even the middle class to access education and healthcare. It's become so expensive. A seat in a school, a seat in a college, many of the dreams and aspirations that middle class has for education, even that becomes so impossible. So you can imagine what happens to the poor. The healthcare, there are many studies that have been made where a person's income, more than 50% of the income is spent on healthcare and on education. And what kind of justice is this? In fact, it has to be free. So in the sense that there are challenges to India's democracy which compromise on rights, which compromise on liberty, which compromises on the principles of universality where all are equal, which compromises on fraternity. And how do we resolve this? Here we come to the question. That is where I come in, saying that if these compromises are to be avoided and if the constitutional principles are to be adhered to, that can happen only through education. And here I might just digress a bit on the preamble, which I should have mentioned, saying that the Constitution of India is a product of a long drawn nationalist movement, a freedom movement. And it was through the freedom movement that these ideas, which are enshrined in the preamble, has got crystallized. I go back to that uh, point again, that there is a crystallization of all these values of justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. Normally, people, when they write books on Constitution of India, they say we have borrowed from UK, we've borrowed from USA, and that's how we made the Constitution. I think this is a wrong notion. This is actually a constitution that was organically that evolved through a process of struggle, where they have arrived at these essential principles of India's democracy. And I might also mention that usually when one talks about revolution, one talks about Chinese revolution, one talks about Russian revolution, American revolution, French revolution. But I must highlight the point that India's nationalist movement is India's revolution, and it's more significant, more important than any of the revolutions that have been achieved. I think we have not seen the transformatory effect of India's revolution, especially the effect which is based on a non-violent movement, a mass movement, this kind of a massive movement that cuts across states, regions, classes, religions, has never happened anywhere in the world. So I thought that we must, in fact, remember that our freedom was well fought, struggled, and it is the responsibility of every citizen to see that this hard won freedom and the principles of this hard won freedom are nurtured and developed. Otherwise, we lose the essence of India's democracy. I mean, I just thought that I should mention this. But if India's democracy has to be, if the essence of India's democracy has to be maintained, it has to, and where I think the core values of democracy would be equality, universal principles, I think, and social justice. It is only by education. No country in the world has attained any social transformation the way one would imagine without education. I might just give you an example of what is happening here in the state of Telangana, which is wonderful that there's so much of investments coming in globally, and of course it's a great development. But with so much of investments coming in, they will need so many people to employ. And if there are not enough educated people, I think the investments will shift quickly to some other place, because there is just not enough manpower. There is not just enough skills that are around. And many of them are already complaining that, yeah, we're making investments, but where is the educated youth? It's a very contrary position. On the one hand, there is unemployment, but on the other hand, there is youth who are unemployable. And I think it is only education that can sort of resolve this issue of overdevelopment but no education, and where education can actually enable democracy and development. So if you say, so that is why I would think education is the only way to realize democratic values laid down in the preamble. It is the only instrument to bring about democracy and break many barriers of caste, class, region, and religion. I think there can be no other way, like in which a democracy can be attained. I'll give you one more example. Imagine a room. I mean, just imagine a conference hall, not the physical conference hall, not virtual conference hall, where all have been to school and are sitting there. And imagine there is a worker who gets into it who barely went to school and who must have studied only up to class 3. He would definitely feel out of place. He wouldn't have the body language to even sit into that conference hall equally next to you. On the other hand, imagine a hall where all are workers, all are have not been to school or completed school, and you enter in with your suit and your pant and you get in, you will still feel very superior. You will still feel so entitled. You feel so that you're better than them. So that is what education gives. Education gives a body language. Education gives a social capital. Education gives a cultural capital. Education gives networks and web of relationships and interaction. Education also gives you new dreams, new aspirations. It will break the cycle of poverty. And I think it's so important that we value the education that we have got. Perhaps we didn't fight for it at all, but there are so many who are fighting for it to be like you and me, and which means to enjoy democracy. For them, it is so important that there are special provisions, and that is why, and that's how they can come on par with you and me. They have to have justice, and a justice in a manner that is enjoyed. Democracy is also social justice, and that social justice comes only with special provisions made for those who have not been in the race. That would be having hostel facilities, free education, scholarships, free textbooks, free uniform, many, many provisions that can give them the dignity to be coming on par with you and me to participate in India's politics and democracy. But what kind of an education system do we have? It is very unequal. We all just look at I'll just show you a picture. This is how many of the schools are after COVID in the country today. Just look at them. It's shocking. 2 years. They could have been kept. They could have been clean. They could have been readied. Nothing was done to them. In fact, I have put the pictures of schools that are relatively, at least there's a building, But on the other hand, we have huge international schools, very well endowed, air-conditioned classrooms, with labs, with facilities. So the schools themselves are so unequal, and so there is an inbuilt exclusion. In world over, schools were instruments to democratize societies. Schools were instruments where rich and poor came to study and learn from one another, impacting the society around them. In India, the schools further divide the society, further divide inequality, bring the gap between the rich and the poor. And sometimes I think that education or lack of education is a kind of apartheid. It's creating such a big gap between the rich and the poor, and it is making schools have become instruments of are anti-democratic institutions at this moment. And I think we will have to fight hard to see that democracy is obtained through education. And that can happen only when the rich and poor go to the same school, or a school where the public schools are endowed with the same facilities, at least the minimum facilities that is required to continue to be playing a role in democratizing societies. Schools have to be inclusive. Schools have to ensure that there is nobody out of school and working. Schools have to ensure that children are enjoying their space, that children are linked everywhere. And it seems that is not happening. We have seen reports coming that even after going up to 10th class, schools don't know basic maths. They're not able to compose a paragraph without mistakes. I think there is a lot that has to be done for schools if our country has to be democratic. So I'm reiterating this. The quality of education in schools is not is about children and learning, but it is about also democracy in the country. And who is to maintain this democracy? Who is to do this? And here I would think it is a state responsibility. State is not investing in education the way it ought to. You find, I am just showing you, this is a Central Square Foundation's research. how the budgets for education are coming down. Look at this Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. It's come down so badly, especially in the year 21-22, when actually you need to have more investments because there is COVID and there is a total disaster in education. You find that the investments have just come down. And for girls, especially when they need so much more support, when we're all talking about Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, you find that there is, just look at the way it has come down so much. So, in a way, I think we have not paid the attention that one has to for education. In fact, education should not be a site for contestation for resources. And why must people fight for education resources? It must be a value, a national value. Whoever is in the government cannot compromise on education. It should be beyond politics. Education has got nothing to do with politics. It has to go beyond politics. It has to be, it's a moral compunction. It's a right. And we have the Right to Education Act, which says that every child should be in school. And it is a fundamental right. One cannot go against a fundamental right. I mean, it is something that a promise that our country has made to the children of India. And this act was passed in 2009 for all children in 6 to 14 years age group. You're in Delhi. I don't know where else you are. You look at the street children. You look at the homeless children. You look at children's faces everywhere. Sometimes I think they're also unseen. When we travel, we just put our head in some other direction. Just look at them, and there you find that the Right to Education Act has not reached to many children, which is unfair, which is unjust. And the right to education is only for children up to 14 years. It has to be for children up to 18 years. There is often a notion that for the poor, children are only up to 14. But in our families, till you're even 24, you're a child, and your parent perhaps can support you. But I must tell you that 18 years is the legal age for a person to be a child. Up to 18, you are a child. It's only after 18 you become an adult and you get a voting right. So there has to be a dramatic increase in investments on education, and there cannot be a debate on the matter. It is a position that has to be taken by all governments. And so we have not invested even half of that so far, and it has to be made a high priority at union and state level. Then we have to, actually this is an important point. While we are talking about education, I know of so many youth activists who are working so hard for children to be in school. You look at the NGOs working. I know one NGO, the MV Foundation that I am associated with, there are at least some 20,000 youth who are working day in and day out, tracking every child in the area. They are working in Bihar, they are working in Telangana, these two areas. In Bihar, they are working in Rohtas. Sorry. They're working in Bihar, they're working in Rohtas, they're working in Champaran, East Champaran, Vaishali, Jamui. You find that there is in very remote areas, these boys and girls are walking up hills, walking down hills to in the forest area to get children to school and to see that they are not working. There is this program in Orissa called Aspire. They are following up with 13 lakh children on a daily basis. And I think that the kind of work the youth activists are doing is unimaginable. These are the youth activists who have an imagination of what a new India is like. They know that a new India means an India where every child is in school. They know that the poorest of parents want to send their child to school. They know poverty is not the cause of child labor. They know that lack of resources, lack of schools lack of secondary schools, lack of transport system, lack of protection mechanisms for children, lack of nutrition, lack of health. All these supports have to be made available to children, and they know that, and that is how they are fighting hard to get children back into schools. I can give stories about how these youth activists are working. They're talking to employers, they're talking to parents, they're talking to school teachers, talking to government administrators, day in and day out. They're mad youth. I know you are also, I mean, the youth of the country, and that madness, that sheer madness, can be only for the youth. We have all grown old. We now can no longer fight so relentlessly. And I often think that there has to be a link between these rural youth activists and the urban youth, where the urban youth can join the movement for education, where the urban youth can express solidarity with them and tell them that we are with you, and where the urban youth and the rural youth are one, they are the same, they are equal. There is this divide is a false divide where all of them together will imagine a new India where every child is at school and learning. And I think in this process, we strengthen India's democracy. We have a vision where there is a citizenship that is enlightened, and that is how I think we can play a powerful role in influencing other countries about democracy, which we still influence. Our pride globally is the fact that we are a democratic country. All that we have to do is strengthen the democracy, and if we do not, let me tell you, we will lose out on all that we have gained so far. To give you an example, democracy is also like sports. It's like practicing sitar or classical music or anything that you do. It has to be constantly fine tuned. We can't take it for granted. See, unless you keep singing and practicing, you don't go to the next level and the next level. Unless you sharpen your sports skills, you can't go to the next level. Democracy is also practicing citizenship at every step in our life. If we do not practice democracy, which means equality, social justice, liberty, fraternity, if we do not practice that, if we do not include the poor in our framework, I am afraid we will lose all the gains that we have made due to democracy. Come, join the youth movement and build a country that is going to be a strong democratic country. Some countries have achieved universalization of education, like China, like South Korea, but they have lost out because I think there is no democracy. Here we have the gift of democracy from the freedom movement. So we can do much more, better than any of them through education. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Shantha ma'am. So we express our heartfelt thank you to you for gracing our event with your auspicious presence. So we are sure that the audience has a lot of key takeaways from this session. We thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Do I take leave?
Yes, ma'am, sure. Thank you, ma'am. As you can